Welcome back to the Deep Plea. In this podcast, we aim to have deep conversations about all sorts of interesting topics to gain more insight and wisdom from the world around us. My name is Karthik. The guy on the other side of the mic is Sven,
Well, hello.
and today we're going to talk about free will. This should be a fun one. Let's start
Yeah,
on the quote for today. Our moral intuitions and sense of personal agency are anchored to a felt sense that we are the conscious source of our thoughts and actions. When deciding whom to marry or which book to read, we do not feel compelled by prior events over which we have no control. The freedom that we presume for ourselves and readily attribute to others is felt to slip the influence of impersonal background causes. And the moment we see that such causes are fully effective, as any detailed account of the neurophysiology of human thought and behavior would reveal, we can no longer locate a plausible hook upon which to hang our conventional notions of personal responsibility. Sam Harris from his book Free Will, 2012. That's a very deep quote with a lot of knowledge. Let's try and unpack it
yeah,
bit by bit. So I'll start with we have, he kind of says in the beginning, if we are the conscious source of our thoughts and actions, then in this way we have the free will to believe we have free will. It's a bit of a confusing
yeah,
statement, but if we kind of don't believe that we follow a Markov chain of probabilities, meaning that um, we have a sequence of events that happen, and the Markov chain of probabilities suggests that the next thing that happens, so the thing that happens at the time plus one, is caused by what happens at time, or time t. So, time t, something happens. Let's say you're walking, and you have a certain probability in the next time step to be doing something else. And so,
right,
if we don't believe that we follow that, then we think we have free will because we can choose at any point that, okay, we'll pick the lowest probability. Like, let's say we're
yeah,
walking, and then the next moment we decide to just do a backflip, like just some random,
right.
it doesn't have a big probability, and we decide that
Yeah,
we have that free will. But if we actually think about how we make our decisions on a daily basis, we know that a lot of our decisions are based on the past events. And we
yeah,
do have some control over this, but our prior events and our reaction to those events is something you know, it comes over time, right? It builds,
yeah,
and it kind of becomes a habit, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I kind of attribute our understanding of free will because our self-awareness. If you look at like animals in nature, like a monkey, a squirrel, like you can give this animal a bunch of scenarios, and usually based on its inherent behavior, it's going to react in consistent ways, and that kind of would be that sequence of events that you've been discussing. And I think that when it comes to humans, because we have the capability to have a feeling or like a thought and then suppress it, that's what kind of draws a line between like what makes us believe in something like free will versus we're an animal. They don't have the capacity to do it, and so they always just kind of do what they think that it's what's needed for nature. And I think that's kind of where consciousness and like cognitive abilities allow us for these types of thoughts to be able to think that having free will is a thing, because in reality you can say that we have free will, but it also means that you didn't have the free will to have free will. So it's kind of like this paradox where it's like, we believe we have something, but it's also something that was put on us without our willpower. I mean, our yeah,
Consent.
free,
Yes.
yeah. But that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think when obviously we have obviously some animal instincts, right? We have fight or flight response, all these things. And we can argue that those are other things that influence our decision making, right? So
Yeah,
those are these past events such as things we can't even control because they're way too far in the past, or there's such things as like genetic predispositions, right?
right,
So the way you're born, we'll talk about this more later, but just obviously the set of cards that you're given will restrict you to be something. That's
right.
just how it is in this world. Life is not fair, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's honestly that simple. Let's get into our easy question for today. Are are our actions predetermined by factors such as genetics, upbringing, and environment? or do we have the ability to make choices independent of these influences? Sven, what do you think?
Yeah. So this is kind of like nature versus nurture. And I think personally that genetics and upbringing and behavior modifications growing up as a kid, I think that is like 90%, I think, of free will, or what we think of free will. Because if you look at, like I said, again, animals, like they just learn and they do. And just because we have the capacity to think outside the box doesn't really change much, because, you grow up and you learn, don't dance on the coffee mug. Don't, I mean, on the coffee
What?
table. On the coffee table. And like, you learn that, but if you didn't learn that and that wasn't a behavior that you were learned, you wouldn't have considered it and you wouldn't have thought about it. But it was because of that experience that you then got the extension of knowledge to know that this is a thing I shouldn't do. And so that's kind of where you have the free will to think like, okay, should I dance on the coffee table or should I not? And it's only because you got exposed to that by a parent or someone telling you to do or not do something. So I kind of think that uh, nurture is going to be that defining factor.
Yeah, I think something I want to bring up is that we have these predispositions that are given to us, whether that's where we grew up or what school we go to. And these are kind of all rivers. They're like a stream of choices, right? And if we are grown up in the United States, and maybe we have a more traditional mindset, our kind of river will like direct us towards college. Like we'll, finish high school, then our river will say, hey, this current is going towards college. Why don't you take this route? And
Mm-hmm.
obviously we can follow that current, but we can also try and divert. We can try and swim upstream and make
Yeah.
choices against who we think we can and cannot be. And I want to bring up something as well, that some currents are too strong, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you're born as a dude and you're like 5'6", and you're like, I want to play in the NBA, and you're swimming up this like
Yeah.
current, like this huge current, it's like maybe that's not worth your time. So you have to kind of decide when your actions are just outside of your, like, you don't have the will. Even if you had willpower and environment, both of those things, you couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
um, in that sense, our free will is binded by some things because
Oh
some
yeah.
things are impossible for us to achieve. We go back to life is not fair. Um,
Yeah.
but a lot of these rivers that we have are mainly kind of, they're not NBA rivers. They're just beliefs about who we can and cannot be, and that's usually on a more intellectual level, um, on a personal level with regard to our character.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Hard question. Based on free will and the will to act in ways we want, what is the probability that we become the person we want to be, assuming that we know the exact specifications of who we want to become? So hopefully that question wasn't too wordy. But I think the simple answer to this hard question is 50%. And the
Okay.
reason for that, maybe that's an easy way to categorize everybody and all their circumstances, but there are some people who will be raised wealthy, they'll be given a nice sum of money, and that kind of stream, right, will take them to be a businessman or a businesswoman. It'll
Yeah.
kind of just naturally take them there. And whereas maybe someone else who was grown up in a poor environment, that natural stream might direct them also to be poor.
Yeah.
And obviously those are rivers that we can swim out of. We can choose to be poor if we naturally are going to become rich, and the other way around, vice versa. But, you know, if we want to be a be in the NBA and we're 5 foot, I don't know. Like, you
Right.
don't,
Right.
0%, frankly. And
Yeah.
if we want to be a couch potato, if that's the greatest vision of our life that we have, then based on, I guess everybody can be that. Maybe you'll die of hunger really quickly, but like
Yeah.
everyone could be that, and that's a river that you can easily push against, and you can like, or you can very easily be controlled by that river.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I also think
sorry,
it's
go ahead.
interesting that yeah, no, I the idea that like there's like a lack of knowledge about something, so you don't have the capacity or capability to do something because let's say for example, in order to become an NBA player, you had to know that you had to get on this team or like do this thing, sign a contract this way. But if no one told you how to do that, you wouldn't have access to that knowledge and you wouldn't be able to do it. So I think that's another condition that kind of cuts back the idea that we have free will as well because we could have free will to do whatever we want, but we may not know what we need to do to get the outcome that we want, even if we have the free will
Yes.
to do so. You know what I mean?
Paradoxes and paradoxes. I
Yeah,
suppose like
exactly.
it's maybe not simple enough to categorize, our kind of circumstances as simply just rivers. Perhaps sometimes they're chasms. Perhaps sometimes they're just clouds. You can float very easily, and you don't even
Yeah.
have to swim with the current. You kind of can float very easily. You could argue towards instant gratification. You could maybe float easily or something like this. Um, but yeah, maybe it's not as simple as just rivers, but I think
Yeah.
that, when you look at free will and you look at the choices that you have to make throughout the day, um,
Yeah.
I don't know what the exact statistic is, but a lot of your daily actions are through habits. And
Yeah.
how are habits formed? We can go back again and again to environment, right?
Right.
So a lot of
Yeah.
your actions are just formed by your environment. Sven, what do you have to say?
Yeah, yeah. So what's interesting is that you have efferent afferent nerves. So you have stimulus that you pick up as a human being in your senses, and it goes to your brain, and you process the information, and then you act. But then you also have the opposite, where you actually send nerves or you send signals to your nerves to your body to make an action. So it's interesting because free will actually is the signals coming from the brain out to the body, whereas normally reactionary, like we said with animals, it's actually information coming into the body and they react. So I think it is very interesting that we can face things such as being scared, but if we prepare ourselves in a way, we could actually not be scared because we've practiced so much in not getting scared. And it kind of gives us like the free will to maybe be able to do something that's scary that, like maybe some sort of like crazy job that the society needs, like, climbing up very high on a building to like clean the windows and all that stuff. Like, so it's like interesting because we can actually overcome what would be kind of like nature's way of saying don't do that because nature's going to be like don't your body's not going to like it if you touch this hot stove, but we can go against that and we can touch the hot stove. So I think it's interesting that we kind of have this ability to kind of put out anti self-preservation behaviors, sort of for lack of better terms, but I think that kind of also plays a big role in why we think, as human beings, that free will is something that's legitimate because we have the ability to go against the grain of nature. Whereas other animals, you don't really see that.
Yeah, a lot of things we're doing on this podcast is going against the grain of nature. Like I want to go to bed or something, or like
Right.
maybe I don't want to record. I just want to like chill back. I want to engage in like something that's easy. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to do the hard thing and delay gratification, but then like I guess when you realize the later benefits of it, obviously the
Yeah.
gratification that is delayed, then you decide that you're going to use some of your energy to swim against some current and try and just be a better person. And maybe we don't necessarily need to know if we have free will because we at least have some controlled will. Like maybe we're bound by
I
some
don't know. We don't
chain that's
know.
a little loose, right? And
Yeah.
obviously we can't become everything or anything. Um, so maybe there's a little chain holding us back, but so long as we don't run too far and then tug that chain, and it's obviously going to pull us back.
Right. Yeah. If you want to kind of talk about the implications of it into the real world, yeah.
Just
Um.
make sure you don't
Yeah.
get pulled back so hard. You're running so fast trying to break all the free wills, and then your chain says, "Hold on now, bud, come back."
Yeah, but what if that was all? What if that was all predetermined? I mean, who knows? Like,
That's why they call fate fate. No?
yeah. Right. It is very complex. It's something like we said with the episode of consciousness that it's not something you can solve because you're within the box of discussing it and you can't really get outside the box. So all you can really do is speculate. So I think you'll never really have a true answer. And actually, Don Hoffman in one of his lectures, the one I had sent you, he explains how they can actually see brain scans and see that even 7 seconds before someone makes, like how I said with efferent nerves, how the signals go from the brain to the body, 7 seconds,
Yeah, I
they
remember
can
watching that.
predict.
Yep.
Yeah, they can predict that someone's gonna, have this type of behavior, this movement, whatever, because the brain kind of gives away certain things before the action happens. So maybe this thing's firing off, maybe this part of the brain's firing off, and you know that from the brain scans that when this happens, it's kind of starting the cycle of moving your left arm, for example. So in that case, the brain and like the physical nature and structures of our anatomy of the brain is predictable, but that still doesn't explain the core at this very second when you think about doing something like that part. Whether that's, like we said, the consciousness, like quantum, positions, like all these things that gets very complicated, or if it's something to do with like consciousness, that's like almost not even science, more so philosophy. And I think kind of that whole, I think it's kind of philosophy at this point when it comes to stuff like free will, because science really can't do enough to get data on it, because it's like we said, the consciousness is incomputational or uncomputational.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand how the thought goes from neuron to neuron, but where does that thought come from originally?
Yeah,
That's
and
the
where
tough question.
actually, like, where is the thought exactly? Like, you could say
Yes.
that it's in this electrical pulse traveling from a synapse to a synapse, but like, okay, go into electrical pulse. All we know is that there's pumps and chains of potassium, sodium ions pumping to push these, these electrical cells, and you have like an axon hillox that once it reaches a threshold of millivolts, then it's going to send off, and it's like, what do you need to actually get to that millivolt point to actually send off this? Because we know that now a lot of times, sometimes we'll have a thought or something we're going to do, but it doesn't necessarily reach the threshold, so we don't do it. And it's like, where's the free will in that? It's like, what if we wanted to do something, but like on a very small scale, but we didn't do it because it didn't reach that millivoltage, because there's kind of like a natural barrier to that, like a nature barrier.
Yeah, you just got very technical. I think that's a good place to end before Sven goes a little crazy. But thank you for watching this episode on free will.
Thank you.
Hopefully you used some of your free will to watch this episode. Or
Oh,
maybe you
that'd be
didn't.
nice.
Who knows?
Use it to click off the video now.
Thank you. Goodbye. Till the next time.
Till next time.